a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for those of you who are present, but also online. Really pleased that we've got a very interesting mix of contributions here. You've got, again, European Space Agency, obviously, but then you've got a chief of the Portuguese Space Agency. We're really pleased to have you, Ricardo, also. Then we have Guillaume, who's here in person, providing, again, a very different perspective, and Aarti, who comes from the Global Satellite Operators Association. So you've got a mix of private, global, Europe, agency, etc. So to kind of really bring this conversation to life about satellite communications. So firstly, if I can turn to Elodie, if I may, a warm welcome to you. I believe I don't have to turn my back. I'm so conscious that I'm being rude, but I'm not. I'm missing modern technology because you can see me from the front, so that's good to know. Elodie, can you give us some background on European Space Agency's security plan? Why is it a priority? But also, how does that project play a part in the 2020 Agenda Programme? Elodie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me virtually today. So there is today that making space matter is a key topic that's gathering us today. So, well, space matters already a lot without even us noticing it. We are on our daily life using it, and there is hardly a moment where we are not using it. When we wake up and we want to see what is the weather forecast of the day, or you want to navigate up to your location for work, and then you are connected, and we are even remotely connected today. So the telecommunication and space and the connectivity is really the day where people are really realizing the importance of space. It's helping the importance of space for our planet, for accelerating the digitalization and the global connectivity, for safety and security, also key transfer and communication in a safe way and secure way are using space in a way already. And there is also a key application during the health, the education, and a multitude of other useful and beneficial applications. The importance is actually, yes, I heard the word solution previously when I joined. And indeed, space technology are providing substantial solution to improve life on Earth, to manage the crisis, could be a climate crisis or can be a geopolitical crisis. So fostering the innovation, driving our economy, and propel our industry that can be the mature one that are reinventing themselves or the startups. So that's what is about space used together and integrated with the terrestrial. So the space is not anymore just in space, but it's also interconnecting it with the terrestrial data. And so I'm the director for telecommunication and integrated application at the European Space Agency. My directorate mission is really to innovate, to leverage and innovate space, develop those space solutions, develop new markets together with our partners. Indeed, we need to talk about those new markets. We need to explain those new markets, what space can bring to them, especially in the area of digitalization. So how it is relevant down to earth to foster those various fields. Can be the field in the term of security, but it's also can be field in term of new commercialization market. So creating partnership is a fundamental partnership between the public investment and triggering additional public investment. As we heard in Europe, the public investment is still a bit shy compared to the global world. And then co-financing it, finding new business model to pilot those new applications. I think our mission in my directorate and with the European Space Agency is really to support the public and the private sector to connect further, to develop secure and sustainable solution in Earth. For Europe, but using the space sector as one element together integrated to the global terrestrial segment. So I heard it's not about just creating the new SpaceX. The market are different. The market in Europe are different than in the rest of the world, but the connectivity is also global. So we need to help and support our enterprise and our European actors to be competitive globally, to be competitive in sectors that are outside of Europe, while also developing a secure solution for government within Europe, and to be able to be the strong partner outside of Europe in some difficult time, or to solve the new challenge of tomorrow that we are already working on strongly, like the climate change that are inducing crises. So we see that during those crises, it's very important to have the connectivity that the security actors at large can reply very quickly. So all those goals have been formulated at the heart of the European Space Agency in our Agenda 2025 to serve European government, industry, institution, and at the end of the day, every one of us, so the European citizen. So the space matter today, and space will even matter more in the future. We see that Europe is has a strong space sector, despite the fact that indeed the public investment compared to other key players could be less. So now we need an acceleration in this sector with more investment from the public in order to partner with the private to bring a fundamental disruption. So it's about going to the next technology. So nowadays, the innovation cycle are much shorter than before. So it's also a question of speed and a question of being able to do the next technology steps. So with a strong acceleration of using space in Europe and also space in Europe to globally connect. So that's why the European engagement in space are so crucial. We need this space to bring the space operation down to earth to benefit the European industry and citizen. And we need this momentum. We need new rules. We need also to do it in a sustainable way. We are talking about a lot about new constellation. Very important to deploy those constellations, but with a mind of sustainability. Like we are taking care of our planet, we also need to care about what is happening in space, especially that it can have some geopolitical implication. So that's a bit in short what I wanted to say in this introduction.
Thank you, Elodie. Can I, given that actually a major cybersecurity attack on our connectivity could close whole cities down. We know that could absolutely affect public services and private services of a whole nature. What role is the private sector playing in your security plans, given that on Earth 70% of infrastructure is owned by the private sector? We know that 70%, and so what's your plan in engaging the private sector? And I suppose the other question, using a kind of let's say a consumer perspective, are we going to end up in a world where 3 players will own and manage our connectivity, and how do we prevent that? I know, really difficult questions, Elodie. You weren't prepared for this.
No, it's okay.
Go on.
It's a question are even better when I'm not prepared for it. You will get a much better answer. So I think the importance for, as you said, there is private actors that are already very active for the cybersecurity on Earth. And it will be likely the same in space. However, one should not forget that those collaborations are done in a term of public-private partnership. For example, even on Earth, even if it's private sector is providing a service, is providing, they are doing it certainly for some governments that are specifying some level of needs and requirements. Identifying really what they need and the level of security. So it's using this same perspective of collaboration between public and private that, for example, we are working to support the European Commission within ESA to deliver where they will have expressed a need for secure connectivity at large, using asset and expertise of the industry to be able to develop new system and a new market. So that's really a question of orchestration of public and private interest, investment.
All right.
We heard before someone saying the coordination. I think this is key, to coordinate, to be able to achieve better, and therefore to identify who has which role and who can leverage better on its expertise.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Elodie. I'm going to, and I'm very grateful for you being here. We'll come back to you for questions, but I'm going to move to a space agency perspective, and I'm really pleased to, Ricardo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're a very significant space agency in Portugal. You're the president there. Give us your take. You've heard a lot so far. Give us a member state perspective on what you've heard so far, especially from like, where the policy is traveling at the moment from your perspective. And very good to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And this is really a great opportunity to talk about this in a free way. I think we all know that space is accelerating our agendas in terms of security, in terms also of sustainability. But the thing is, we are in Europe, and I follow the discussions, the previous panel, and we are in Europe. In Europe, we are 27 member states. We are 27 governments, 27 space agencies, 27 defenses, and it's a perfect complex environment to take decisions, right? And I think I heard some days ago that in Europe we trust more in governments than the US, and the US trust more in the market. And this probably makes all the difference. I saw a presentation for a young kid of 10 years old, and they asked him about space. What are you gonna do when you grow up in space? And he just mentioned, I want to make business in space. This is a perspective, a different perspective probably that we have here in Europe. And this will shape, of course, what we are doing. And I'm really, really concerned about this institutional role of Europe, and particularly our Commission, and particularly in the security connectivity, because it seems that we are going the directions that probably the Commission will not put themselves as a customer to push to develop the technology and develop the market. And I think I heard about some comments before, and I really think that the agencies, also institutional or institutions, should be put themselves in the procurement side. And this is happens, for example, when we are talking about the opportunities for commercialization. Look where we are, particularly in the access to space. We are stuck in Europe in access to space because there are some quite institutional markets, and we are afraid that what's happened with the Starship that will probably blow up our perspectives to access space in Europe. And this is something that we need to look what will be the scenario to improve really the commercialization. One thing that we don't see in Europe is defense push, and of course to complement the budget, and push also in space to develop the market, institutional market, of course. But it's something that we see this in the US. And in the perspective of the small space or emergent space agencies like the Portuguese, of course, we want to play a role on these opportunities. But we need to look the real opportunities related to the needs of the country. And probably we are running the initiatives to prepare to launch a satellite constellation to tackle some problems in our territory here. But the thing is how we position ourselves as an agency in, for example, to open the data to foster the development of downstream applications. So this is our position, this is our role, assuming that we need to take some, let's say, some actions in the data policy to foster the commercialization. So this is one of the main aspects for sure concerns me as a responsible for the space agency, but I think this is a key issue to really foster the commercialization. And we need to be less institutional and to not be really protective. I heard an expression some years ago that it seems like also Europe, we don't have millionaires. So at the end, we have millionaires, but they don't want to take risks, and particularly in space. And we need to attract all of these persons to foster the commercialization. This is what the first summary that I want to contribute.
Ricardo, thank you. I suppose I felt that you're slightly despondent about where we find ourselves. Is there anything you're optimistic about in terms of where any policy agenda that you think that's the one that's the right one? And also, are many of your colleagues in the kind of space agency community feeling similarly to you?
Oh, I really think so, because look, when we talk with each other, there are common words or base words that normally we express ourselves as a commercialization is the key driven to develop this sector. But then, as I said, we are very complex in Europe. To produce a document, we take 6 months, and then to take another decision, more 6 months. As I said, probably this is our fault because of our rules to the how we govern ourselves, because we are so many, and we need to discuss this. But I really think that there are a common idea that we need to be fast. I heard about the speed. Okay, the speed is something that we need, but we need the consistency, and we need at least our institutions. I'm talking about particularly of this security connectivity, and also, for example, what we are discussing now, the space traffic management. We are, let's say, put this in a top-down level. We are not open, in my feeling, we are not open this properly to foster the markets. See what's happened with, for example, to micro launches. I just mentioned that we are stuck at the access to space, and because we didn't prepare. Look what we did. We decommissioned Ariane 5, we don't have Ariane 6. We will have in 1 year, probably. And this is something that the private sector, in particular, this area of micro launches should be developed. We need to foster in the institutions to foster the development of this segment. This is an example, but also, as I said, security connectivity. Look, makes sense, for example, that European Commission start to think to build or to set up some kind of terrestrial communications company to deal with the institutional market. I don't think it makes sense. We need to open this to the market. The market can offer the capabilities, the services, and the institutions should put the requirements to force the boundaries. I think this is the way forward to foster really the markets, even the institutional markets.
Ricardo, thank you very much. I'm really interested in what people are thinking about that in terms of the, let's say, I'm not saying you're saying take a free market approach, but it is very much let the market in and don't let the institution create the market. But and there are big themes, obviously, from this morning around, we need the institutional infrastructure that's solid and making sure it's keeping a hard discipline on vision and planning for the future. But the recurring themes are about speed, public-private sector investment, being able to move faster and create much more of a, let's say, perhaps a messier more co-producey type of space with a range of different players and not just the usual ones. But thank you very much. But building on your themes, Ricardo, thank you. Please do stay with us because there'll be questions to you, I'm sure, in the conversation. Well, let's move to a law expert. I'm really pleased that we've got Guillaume here with us. Guillaume, thank you for joining us. What's your perspective on how Europe can strike this balance, if you like, between, market making, creating the private sector inside, much more so, whilst maintaining security? I'm not sure if that's just a contradiction in terms, but over to you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Many thanks for your invitation. It's an honor to be with you. I'm Swiss and French citizen, doctor in law in maritime.
I need you to move the mic closer to
private
you. Lovely.
Maritime security, former UN civil servant. I joined the membership of the European Center for Space Law of ESA 22 years ago, and I'm joining this month's law firm in Paris as attorney at law. The first legal statement we can do is the fact that private companies are playing an increasing important role, but at the same time, the existing legal instruments are not adapted to these new actors, which raise some legal issues which are either general or specific to telecommunications. So, concerning the modernization of space sector, originally, as we said, space law has been adopted for states. Recently, the COPUOS in 2019 recognized the importance of this partnership to enhance this partnership between states, international organizations, and private sector. Then private companies work in scientific research, telecommunication, and even in military surveillance. This integration, we can call it a public service delegation. Concerning the space sector and the internal market, we need to enhance the European preference. For example, the geographical return in ESA, for example. We need also to copy the launcher regulation, the Article 5 of the Regulation 2021 regarding the launchers. We also need to better control the foreign investment in order to not to lose our European companies. Concerning the international investment law, there are some difficulties in applying investment treaty in space activities. For example, the difficulty in determining the host state, or another difficulty is to find out who is responsible for a specific space operation. Concerning the financing from the WTO point of view, national legislation established barriers to foreign investment in telecommunication companies. There are few examples of dispute between Mexico and US or Japan and France. And in aviation, the case of Boeing versus Airbus, which took 17 years, it's too long. So the question is, WTO is not the efficient framework for space activities because WTO is reluctant to the state intervention. Nevertheless, aerospace relies more than ever on direct and indirect intervention of public authorities to support operators. Concerning the financing in Europe, we are facing the risk of litigation on the basis of the Article 107 209 of the Treaty on Functioning of European Union. Especially state aid would be targeted and also facing a dispute at the WTO level. Now, more perhaps technical issues dealing with the forum shopping on frequencies in order to avoid administrative slowness, which is not acceptable in EU. Another problem is the fact that private companies could not access to military frequency bands in order to avoid that military operation would be put in danger. Another point is it is necessary to ensure that measurement technology is still up to date related to emission technology. Also, the improvement of the identification of space segment interference attack by the typology of the attack, the probability associated to this attack, and also to identify the who is able to finance such attack. Few points again to fix the ground segment of vulnerabilities, like ENISA used to do by organizing exercise to identify vulnerabilities. Perhaps to integrate optical frequencies in the ITU instruments in order to implement the space traffic management between two satellites, for example. Also, to continue to enhance effort on quantum cryptology. And the last point is about the promotion of the ratification of the protocol for the peaceful resolution dispute of the interpretation of ITU instruments. Thank you very much.
Guillaume, thank you very much. Forgive us, because that was very technical in parts, but very informative, right? And I think we need that up on a flip chart somewhere to really understand what the risks and challenges are that you've set out. But, you know, in reality, there is no judge and jury for space. Who's the lawmaker and who's going to take action globally? In reality, what we know by the treaties that are like over 30 years old, that a member state, if they want to, they electively have to say what they're putting up in space. But actually, there are no penalties if they don't. The tiny UN office that deals with it is basically toothless if someone contravenes a lot of this legislation. I mean, the WTO doesn't really have a court. How do we deal with rogues and lawbreakers in space?
I would say that it's might be a national legislations, but at the same time, national legislation is in contradiction with international law, space law. This is the problem.
Precisely. So it's just I know that my colleague, my dear fellow, in the public, launch of the Running Out of Space raises this issue. But really, it's time to really wake up. And someone said, "Smell the coffee." I don't mean that, but there's no horizon here. The reality of space domination, market making, private sector involvement is so high at the moment, right? And actually, the risks are equally high, yet we don't know who the lawmaker is and how we create compensation for the consumer to make sure their safety and security is not only promised, but they can hold on to it with some confidence. And I think that it strikes me that we really might need to get a grip, because there is no strategic autonomy in space. How do you control foreign direct investment in space? And whilst these words and phrases are great, in reality, it's quite difficult to do, especially this false notion of strategic autonomy. How do you get that in space? It's quite an interesting concept. But thank you very much for your commentary. Before I move on to our final speaker, are there any questions from the floor or even from our virtual audience on what you've heard so far? So I recognise there's been a lot of talking heads so far, but before I move on to Aarti, if you've got any questions. Indeed, I know that, sir. But that's why I'm creating a little bit of a break so that people might have an opportunity to ask questions before we move to Aarti. Paul. Gentleman here. Please do introduce yourself.
Paul Taylor, I'm Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe and the author of the study that will be presented this afternoon. My question is to Ricardo Conde, because if I understood you right, you think that the European Union should not be in the business of launching a secure connectivity constellation and dealing with government satellite communications. How do you, I mean, almost everything we've heard from everybody today says that there is a crying lack of public investment in space in Europe compared to both the United States and China, our two principal competitors. So how do you square that? The European Commission has come up with a proposal for a major public investment that is a public-private project, joint project, and you're saying they shouldn't be in that business, it should be left to the private sector. Where is this private sector that would take up that?
Okay, Paul, that's a fairly provocative challenge back to Ricardo. And before I do go back to Ricardo, I think there is Vodafone in the room somewhere. Is that the case?
Yes, indeed.
Ah, can I pick on you? Obviously, you are a partner of ours also on our Connected Europe initiative, and I can't waste the opportunity of having Vodafone in the room just to get your perspective on some of the security elements. You know, what's your reaction to what you've heard as a very significant household brand that deals with connectivity? I know it's tough and you weren't planning to answer this question, but hey, you're here.
No, thank you for the question indeed. I mean, of course, it's a key topic also for us, and good to see for us also that there is this space sector and industry that is setting the scene, because, I mean, it is important for us also to see that there is a European initiative on this. And we are, let's say, looking at it with interest.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Ricardo, back to you.
Well, I didn't say that the COM should not play a role in secure connectivity. What I said is they should be concentrated in the procurement itself, because this is something that also we see this in the US. And this is the way they foster the markets to procure the services. Because I gave an example. Currently, there are so many companies, they already provide communications. Let's talk about satellite communications. So, and the company itself, they are responsible also to respond to the needs of the customers, and particularly to the institutional customers. What I'm afraid is to create some kind of institutional market provided, the service provided by public institutions. This is what I mean. So we should avoid that, because then what we are doing is concentrate part of the service. Now they are running in some companies, and we are creating some institutions to provide the services. This is what I mean. This is something that we see in the US exactly the opposite. For example, taking account that I mentioned in the role of defense. Defense in Europe, particularly in Europe, they are using this mechanism. They rely on private companies to provide these services. So I'm afraid that if we go in the directions to be more institutional, some parts of the business will be driven by public institutions. And I think we already passed this phase long time ago, when we rely on the companies to provide the service. This is what I mean. So foster the procurement of service by institutions.
That's really, I mean, it's a very helpful clarification, Ricardo. What you're really saying is let the system be more efficient and people have that sense of role recognition. And what you're saying is the public sector can best place to play a role in this if it really kind of procures. It uses strength in procurement, but do that in an intelligent way. Thank you for that. Aarti, over to you, last but not least. Great to have you with us. You're part of the Global Satellite Operators Association and Secretary General there. Give us your take. I mean, let me go off script for a minute. Give me your take on what you've heard so far. You know, you are representing global satellite operators. What do they make of what the public sector's doing? Yes. What would your sector like more of and less of, if I could put it that way?
Let me make some general remarks first.
Yes, please do.
I think it's clear, and everybody has said it, that it has never been clearer how important space is for society, for humanity, as it is right now. Whether it's because of the pandemic, the climate change emergencies we're facing, or the geopolitical tensions that are around the world, the need for space services, and in particular satellite communications, is seeing, you know, its heyday like it never has before. At the same time, we're living at a time of unprecedented technological innovation. I think people, users, humans, citizens, are demanding on their governments, on academia, on industry. They are calling for solutions to the global challenges that we face because finally they are feeling that it impacts their lives. And every sector, every institution or organization is responding in some way. And space is no different. And we are uniquely placed within the space sector because of the inherent immunity to events on Earth, the inherent reach of satellite technology, and of course the inherent security. There are far fewer entry nodes into satellite systems than there are into terrestrial networks, so we enhance the security of networks. When it comes to SatComs, there is a lot of hope being placed on next generation non-geostationary satellite systems. They're perceived as holding the answer to addressing some of these global challenges. In my view, that is a view which is held by those outside the space sector. And in reality, it is the multi-orbit offering of the satellite community as a whole that is going to make a difference to enabling the services that are required to address some of the challenges that we're facing. I do think that Commissioner Breton's initiative is an obvious response to what we see happening on the global stage. There are so many new systems emerging with government backing, a comment which has been made repeatedly. And I think that Europe would be doing a disservice to European industry if we did not try to create the environment necessary for similar innovations in this sector within the EU. Commissioner Breton has also stated on numerous occasions that there is no European GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, the US technology companies, and that he wants to make sure that Europe doesn't miss this second wave of the internet. When we see just how many countries intend to launch new NGSO systems, it's absolutely clear that the penny has dropped globally with governments everywhere. They realize that satellite systems are key to unlocking huge economic opportunities that stand to arise from the new wave of the internet, but more generally from the global ecosystem, be it environmental, be it digital, be it geopolitical, that is arising. And that is why satellite systems and satellite communications are more geopolitically relevant today than they ever have been before, and that holds true for Europe as well. Thanks.
So I take that point, and you know, it's very, very eloquently made. But in terms of what you know, your association and the operators that are up that are there, do you feel that what Europe needs to do is establish a much more substantial grand plan of investment and approach, which is currently, you've got Breton taking a very effective and interesting perspective. He's bringing his private sector experience, and a lot of people are saying he's good news. But at the end of the day, do we, given what you've just said about what space has the potential of space, do we need a very different perspective on a grand plan for space? When we think about the European Space Agency, you've got the European Commission responsibility, and then you've got all of you in the middle, let's say as operators. How do you just respond to that? Do we need that?
I'm not in favor of grand plans.
Okay.
I'm very much a pragmatist. I believe in seeing results. And I think, yes, there is a huge amount of good work being done. I find the ESA accelerator programs that Elodie's, that ESA has launched particularly interesting and an attempt to speed up and accelerate the response that satellite systems can have to certain challenges. When it comes to the European Commission and Europe as a whole, you know, the operators are there providing services. However, not really with that much government support. Yet, the policymakers are the ones who are sitting on top of so many challenges, whether it's in the field of agriculture or digital or environment or whatever you want. And their IoT, you know, environmental monitoring, I think we are missing a link which brings the solution closer to the problem. We have so many European satellite operators, huge assets, huge capabilities, but there is no framework under which they are called upon systematically to respond to specific challenges.
There you go. I call that a grand plan. No, really, because you're right. When you think about, you know, if at a city level, policymakers can see what's happening to their environment, can understand real time what's going on, the kind of the agility of decision making could be really pushed up the backside to do something if it was made sense of. And as you say, in so many different realms, what we have ahead of us and above us has a huge opportunity, but we're missing that, what you've just described. What will that take, do you think? Does that have to come from, you know, if we've been looking at managed markets, free markets, public sector, top down, bottom up, etc. You've been there for some time, you've seen this play out in many ways. Do you think at the end of the day, the European lot or the global lot will just come say, look, we're going to create some sort of architecture for this? Or do you think it will come from the Commission or the European Space Agency?
I don't know where it will come from, but I think it takes courageous politicians who are willing to think out of the box. I think Breton really took a bold step when he pushed for this constellation. And we, as a sector, are glad that he did. It put SatComs on the map in the European Union in a way that it hasn't been before. But look, if you look at the digital divide in Europe, when I started with GSOA, European back then, we had a digital divide of some, I think, maybe 9 million European citizens. Meanwhile, we're still at 7. We're still at 7 million. Or somewhere between 6 and 7. The number is huge. If there was a framework which actually supported satellite operators to make connections, direct satellite broadband, more satellite backhaul, more community Wi-Fi solutions, you would not only see your digital divide being bridged, you would see even more satellites being ordered. So it supports the entire value chain if you support a market-driven approach like my friend Olivier was saying.
No, absolutely, because you're right. And unfortunately, most of that divide is in the East. When we look at some of our member states in the East, but also if you look further into the Western Balkans, vast swathes of the countries are absolutely unserved by the internet, which has an impact on education, access to service, etc. And you think, you know, go figure, it's such an easy solution, and you could actually drive economic growth much more quickly. But thank you for making that point and responding to that. So I've seen you. I promise you I'll bring you in. Yeah? So please, could someone...
Yeah, thank you. You'll permit me to make some questions also to the very important work you are trying to do here in Europe, because the Americans already, they have begun by putting by the Congress the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. So who is responsible for the international law? The U.S. And what are we going to do with Starlink, 30,000 satellites microsatellites, already 10,000 on our environment, which is full of debris, and the Swiss is trying to do something a lot of years, and the ESA also is doing very good work, but this work needs 30 years in order to have some results, and our environment is full of debris. And ending, the cybersecurity, we should have the agency on the space. You lately made an agency, a kind of cybersecurity unit inside of, but we are discussing in the cybersecurity communities who is going to be the responsible. And ESA is not the responsible. Another bodies we are creating are not the responsible. We are waiting you to come in the cybersecurity communities. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Any other question before I go back to some of our speakers? Don't be shy. Or is it that pre-lunch moment where you really just want to get out of here? I hope not. Excellent. Well done.
Thank you very much.
You introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Matthew Small from the UK mission to the EU. So first of all, I'm excited to be here and for the launch of the paper, which Paul is. I'm glad Paul's here to kind of present it, and I'm grateful to him for the opportunity to feed into that. Actually, excuse me, from the UK perspective. So I'd like to focus on space traffic management with my question, because I think that's a key aspect of security in space. And we have a kind of a range of divergent approaches across the globe to kind of try and answer the question of having a system for space traffic management. So I'd be interested in the views of the panel on who does what where should the different sort of competences, to use quite a kind of European word, because there are kind of standards already being developed in the ISO. The Commission put out a communication in February on the topic of space traffic management, and ESA is also getting involved to some extent, and of course that's where a lot of the expertise lies. And at the end of the day, you need a kind of global system.
Indeed.
But all of these organisations have different mandates and different sort of accountability to different states or different actors. So who does what? What's the sort of, perhaps to Aarti, what would be the ideal for satellite operators? What would they want? And the institutional people, kind of, where do they see their roles in all of that?
Okay, and that's a general question to everybody, I imagine.
Yeah, I'll leave it up to you to
No,
decide
thank you very
who's
much.
best
Matthew,
candidate.
if I can, because I think you have a measure of me, I will come back to you because you're from the UK Commission. And how I've missed the opportunity of what you're doing there. Now, it's clear that despite the fumblings of Boris, you've taken a really very effective approach on space, and you're, if I can say, rocketing ahead. But is there and this is not meant to be a political question, Matthew, is there a sense of wanting to collaborate in an intelligent way on security matters in space with the European Union?
So this is part of the reason I'm asking the question.
Okay.
I think, so in terms of kind of European collaboration on space, we remain, of course, a member of ESA and a fully committed one, and see great value. And frankly, as you say, we have a national space strategy with big ambitions, but as it stands, there's not much we can do as a nation on our own without ESA. So we look to ESA, of course, as a kind of a member state as it exists. In terms of the EU, I think I throw the question a bit back towards the European Commission. To be quite frank, in terms of the politics, especially with the kind of current leadership in the Commission that stands towards the UK is quite hostile, frankly. So I don't see many kind of windows of opportunity for that collaboration. I think when it comes to questions of security, as I say, it's one of these things that we have to collaborate on, because it's the only way that the like-minded space powers of the world have to collaborate on it, because you need kind of global solutions to these problems.
Indeed. No, because the reason why, I've discussed this with Paul as well, you need one collision that's not, which is kind of looked at in an aggressive manner, and then we have a whole situation of security warfare up in space. And at the moment, we've got no mechanism, no approach to really understand how we deal with that. And this is what worries me. Or a global kind of a framework or infrastructure for really doing something about that's something that could happen tomorrow, or to have a whole city hacked down. And given what we've heard about the capacity of Russia in terms of covert operations or elsewhere in the East, it's only a kind of a step away that we will witness some of this. And I just hope that political leaders will think beyond the immediate realm for that. But thank you for your question. So I'm going to go back to Elodie first.
Yes. So for the two previous questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I think it's very important, as I mentioned, we see the number of low Earth orbit constellation initiated from the US, but also from Asia. And indeed, what about how we are going to handle the space debris and therefore the space traffic management question? It goes hand to hand. So at the same time, all those constellations, as we were mentioning before, are providing crucial capability back on Earth. So we want to foster this opportunity, develop those markets. And then there is two elements. First element, what we can do is to have a regulation, have some net zero debris policies that we can put forward to ensure that when we are starting those initiatives, as a minimum as European level, and then influencing and strongly encouraging the rest of the world to deploy and design those solutions with the capability to reduce the number of debris in case of collision. A bit like I'm taking a very example, when your cars get hit by a rock, either your glass explode in little pieces, or you are putting things in place in the design that you are more robust to collision. Then there is the second aspect, that indeed how to monitor the environment to do active space traffic management and space situation awareness. And there is some multiple entities that we have heard. So I will not go inside the detail of who is doing what, as it's not my field of expertise. However, I can reassure you that there is extreme effort of coordination amongst the European Commission and ESA to indeed take an approach, a pragmatic approach, and a coordinated approach between the various European entities.
Elodie, thank you. But do you think, I mean, say something were to happen, is it NATO's job? Is anything that happens in space that we should insert into the constitutional, mandate of NATO, or do we need something else? I know it's a political question for you, and I'm happy for you to duck it if you want to. But do you have a view?
At this stage, I think that there is a need for all the international bodies and European bodies to reflect on how to best approach it. I don't have specific view if it should be NATO or other at this stage.
Great, but it goes back to the Matthew's question about who does what and how. Thank you very much. Ricardo, over to you.
Look, we are discussing now how to some models, and particularly if, for example, the model that we have in the maritime law could be also extrapolated to the global space traffic management. There are two dimensions here, of course, like Elodie already said. One of the technological point of view to develop some capabilities, collision avoidance, monitoring, removal debris, which I think Europe is quite advanced in some programs, and these policies of zero debris policies. But there are another dimension which is much more complex, which is international collaboration, because they are cooperative collaboration, or otherwise there are some, let's say, countries that probably they are not have any kind of interest in this cooperation, unless they start to feel they need it, because they are putting in risk their objects in space. And these dimensions are quite complex. We are now in Europe discussing about how we should organize ourselves, but for sure, and our colleagues from space law probably will have a word on that, this should be a coordination with the national space laws also, and some kind of let's say a common understanding about how should we coordinate. And again, I don't know if it will be NATO or not. I don't believe, unless we will evolve for a future space sector like the military and operational arena, and this will put in cause, of course, what's so-called the new economy. And then, if we go in this direction, probably we'll be ruled by the military rules. So I really believe that the natural place to talk about this should be a UN. And you know, this is something that in close coordination with the national laws, this is the way to go forward. At the end, it's a question of regulation and the international cooperation. Because I really believe that in the technology point of view, we are prepared to give some steps that we can do it. But also in Europe, we need to look how to do it. Again, not be very concentrated. Look what happened in the US. They are open the data for the catalog data, and they are more or less formatted by technology driven. That means all the operators should provide solutions to the constellations and then based on some kind of standards. And this is the point. The standards, we need to go forward also to implement these international standards to be possible to all of us to live in peace with the space debris.
Ricardo, thank you. Some very interesting, I suppose, ideas around how you might kind of really use maritime law as a proxy for some of this. A very interesting thought, I think. And also, at least you've been very clear that you said, it's the UN. It's the UN with others, but UN should perhaps take the lead. But I suppose the only question I have is when we've had the UN here, during our space conversation in the past 12 months or so, we know it's a tiny little office with no teeth and with no real kind of power within the structure itself. And it's a point where the UN perhaps needs to get a bit real about both the risk and the opportunity of space if we don't do something. I've literally eaten into your lunchtime. I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to finish without letting our two contributors respond. So if you'd like to say something, Guillaume, on the issue of law, international law, our institution.
Concerning the debris, it's not a question of law, I would say, because it's almost impossible to answer. Where I'm concerned, it's more about, space debris, but if we want to...
Bring the mic to you closer to you, please. Sorry.
I think that if we decide to deorbit satellites towards Earth for their vaporization, it's okay, but some part will stay, small part in the layer of the atmosphere, and also other polluants will be sent into the Pacific Ocean. The name of this point is the Nemo point, but still it might generate another type of pollution. And concerning the space traffic management, it's more a question of governance, and it's about multilateralism. Thank you.
And are you prepared to say whether we need a new multilateral body, or do the current ones fit?
Sorry?
Would you be able, if I asked you, do you think that either NATO or UN is the multilateral body, or do we need a new one?
I think that first it's better to learn to live with what we have. Okay. Instead of, for example, just to give you an example, we criticize WTO. No, we start to criticize ITU instruments, too slow, bureaucratic, and at the end, because of trade interest, we decided to go to WTO. And then we realized that Boeing and Airbus lasted 17 years. So I think that it's better to enhance the current instruments instead of trying to change something.
Great, thank you. I'd be interested to get your views over lunch on that. But building on what Guillaume has said and others have said, I don't think we've got the luxury of time. But that's just my view, and in terms of what might happen, what the speed of technology change that you refer to. Aarti, over to you to reflect on those. Who does what? How do we do it? The question from Matthew, but also any, responses to what we heard from the gentleman earlier also.
Yep, I think this is very much like climate change in the sense of every little contribution helps. And it's incumbent on every one of us to do our bit. And when we talk about space sustainability, I think every one means every government. But I think the EU SST is a great initiative. Satellite operators support any initiative which fosters the greater sharing of data. We would encourage that it not be limited to Europe, that agreements be signed as fast as possible with other regions, with operators, so that more data is shared, because the more data you have, the more conjunction analyses and so on the system will produce. The dialogue at the UN level has to continue. It should not break down, but governments, I think, should look at what's happening and reach their own conclusions and be informed by speaking with different operators as to what can be done and what should be done and what they believe needs to happen for them. So from the operator's perspective, we do believe the time to act is absolutely now, but there is room for both fostering more best practices, but as well as standards and regulation, all of it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Colleagues, that's it. I'm sorry, I really have eaten into your lunch by some time. I hope you thought that was helpful, useful, but just one thing to leave the thought with you. Currently, trillions of data points are being generated about all of us in this room, and no one has a clue how to regulate that or manage that. Just a thought when we think about space. So we might want to think more seriously about really getting a grip on data, which is going to be the biggest driver of social policy and planning and politics as we move ahead. And I know that my dear colleague, Paul, will be addressing some of that in one of his recommendations in this. So have lunch. We've given you a generous amount of time. Don't leave. Do come back for the launch of the study, and also our Africa-Europe session as well. Thank you all very much, and thank our speakers. Thank you, Ricardo, Elodie, and Guillaume and Aarti.